Thanks, Eric. So as Eric stated, we have muted the phones to reduce background noise, but if you could also, if you have to leave the meeting, also not put the phone on hold in case we have to open the lines. That won't, we won't hear your background music. So at various points during the webinar, we will open the line for questions. So you can send messages via the chat function, and make sure you send it to all participants as it's shown there so we can all see them. And if we are not able to answer your question during the webinar, we will follow up with you individually afterwards. So as Eric said, thank you everybody for joining us, and I will hand it over to Chris Tetchy, who is going to be leading this session. Chris?
Rose, thanks. And thanks to all the corporation staff for their support and assistance that was provided in preparation of this webinar. I also want to acknowledge Eric, who has helped and provided ongoing support for this webinar session. My name is Chris Tetchy, and I'm one of the JBS compliance coaches that support CIF intermediaries. I've worked with the corporation in various capacities for over 20 years. Now I'll let Lynn and Brittany introduce themselves. Lynn?
My name is Lynn Ballard, and I'm with REDF. I serve as our Grants, Contracts, and Compliance Administrator, and I've been here for almost 3 years. And I have a couple of decades of experience working with federal awards and federally funded projects. This is our second round of CIF funding. REDF came into the, REDF was awarded our initial CIF award in 2010, and we're very happy to have received a second award last year, and we're using that funding to expand our portfolio nationwide.
Hello everyone, this is Brittany Nixon, and I'm Share Strength's CIF Financial Analyst and Compliance Manager. I've actually worked with Share Strengths on the CIF project for about a year now, and this is Share Strength's first CIF award, and so we're very excited. And I have about maybe 7 years of experience in managing federal grants.
Thank you both for taking the time to join us on this webinar. I think the specific experience that you'll share will be really helpful. So that's a little bit about us. Now we wanted to take a minute to see who's on the webinar. So we'd like to take a minute or two to have you respond to the short poll that will give us a sense of your experience as a CIF intermediary, as well as your experience with subgrantee monitoring. So you'll see the poll off to the right-hand side of your screen. So just please take a second. So it looks like we have a good mix of different organizational experience, with the largest group looking to be in the 1 to 2 year time frame. Most of the group provides both on-site as well as remote monitoring, and it looks like there's a good mix of the split between combined fiscal and program and separate. So that's a little bit about the group that's gathered here on the phone. And in terms of the webinar today, so during this webinar, we're going to present elements to consider when designing your monitoring tools, your activities, and plans for your CIF subgrantees. It's important, if your organization has a monitoring system, that we strongly suggest that you take advantage of the existing system and incorporate elements specific to your CIF grant and federal compliance into that system. As you know, organizations are required to follow their own policies and procedures, which can be more restrictive than the federal government. An example of that is your organizational policies and procedures might require an annual site visit, whereas this is not a federal requirement. So in that case, you'd want to make sure that you're following your policies and procedures. In addition to presenting elements to consider when monitoring, you'll hear from Lynn and Brittany, who will share some of their experiences. You'll also hear how you can use the information that you collect during your monitoring to support your subgrantees. Monitoring is one of the critical activities in managing your CIF grant. The intermediary is responsible for the overall grant compliance. Throughout the monitoring process, you'll develop and maintain an important relationship with your subgrantees. This process is important to support the success of each subgrantees and therefore your overall grant. A key requirement of the SIF terms and conditions is the requirements for intermediaries to follow the uniform guidance. So know that that is for grantees receiving grant awards or amendments after December 26, 2014. Those are the grantees that are subject to the uniform guidance. Grantees that receive their award and no amendments since are subject to the OMB circulars. So when I'm referring to the uniform guidance, I'm referring to 2 CFR. Specifically within that is 200.331, which contains specific requirements for pass-through entities, which is the intermediaries. There's a list of information that must be disclosed in the grant agreements, MOUs, and contracts that you have, and includes all of the requirements imposed by the intermediary on the subrecipients to ensure that the federal award is used in accordance with the statutes, the regulations, and the terms and conditions. So it's important that you take a look at 2 CFR 200.331 if you are received your funds or an amendment after December 26, 2014. Within this regulation, there's also information on indirect cost language for your subgrantees and information regarding allowing auditors access to both your records as well as the subgrantee information. In addition, the CFR now requires subgrantees to evaluate the risk of the subgrantee. Requires the grantees to evaluate the risk of the subgrantees and monitor both program and fiscal information. Since there may be more than one person involved in the monitoring due to the program and fiscal complexities, it's important to develop an integrated plan to ensure that all of the uniform guidance is met. Lastly, I want to remind you that as you're thinking about your subgrantees, there is a specific difference between subgrantees and contracts that is also in the federal regulations, which is in 2 CFR 200.330. So starting with 200.330, you'll determine whether your interpretation of a subgrantee is correct, and those are the people that we're going to focus this webinar on. Throughout the monitoring process, you'll identify what's going well as any potential and existing issues that you'll identify with your subrecipients. That will allow you to address the issues and challenges immediately, avoiding additional pitfalls. It's a best practice to take some time after monitoring to look at the whole portfolio and identify themes across the groups. This information should inform your training and technical assistance plans and allowing you to provide the best support for your subgrantees. Lastly, the monitoring report is an important component as it ensures follow-up on issues and outlines corrective action plans. Many new intermediaries may wonder what informs the monitoring plans and activities of a complex grant such as this. A component of 2 CFR 200.331 that I just spoke about is that intermediaries must use a risk approach to evaluate their subgrantees' risk for noncompliance. Some intermediaries may perform a pre-award risk that gives you information during the selection process. If this is not done, it must be done, including in your development of the monitoring process. Some risk factors include subgrantee staff, capacity, experience. You should have information on these items from a multitude of sources. Sources include your RFP applications that subgrantees may have submitted when they were doing their proposal, organizational capacity sections from that same proposal, information that you've had in interactions while you're operating their SIF grant, any information on turnover or changes that you've discussed are all important pieces to include in your risk assessment. Another piece is looking at your own organization risk tolerance. How much monitoring is enough for your organization's leadership to rest comfortably at night and ensure compliance of the overall grant? What is the amount of your staff and organizational capacities that you've designated to managing your grant? Remember, as the intermediary, you're ultimately responsible for the entire grant compliance and performance. So risk is an important component to consider. Finally, there's helpful information in your assessment looking at the organization's audit and financial statements, which can inform you of a multitude of issues: prior potential problems, what cash they have on hand, how much is the organization's equity. There's many critical pieces of information contained in the financial statements regarding size of the organization, their liquidity, and you'll be able to identify other federal grants that they manage to confirm any experience that they've stated. The budget and financial reports that you're receiving from the program either on a monthly or quarterly basis will also give you data on spending as well as match. In addition, I know some of you have made additional site visits or completed interviews with your subgrantees that have provided other relevant pieces of information. You should use all the information that you have to inform your monitoring process. So what drives your monitoring activities and allows you to decide what type of monitoring will be used by your organization? That should be your policies and procedures. This is where you outline the process for the overall organization. Information may include specific interventions for each risk level, frequency of risk assessment, and what issues impact a subgrantee at any risk point. Additionally, your organizational monitoring strategy presents your philosophy on monitoring. This is where the risk component of the monitoring system determines your actions. Criteria is developed to determine actions in the support of various risk levels. For example, we have a risk tool, and Eric's going to display this. In looking at the risk tool we discussed on the onboarding webinar, which is contained in the Resource Center, and the link is in the chat box. That risk tool will inform your monitoring plan for each subgrantee, then identify the activities and timeline for each group. It's typical to designate a prescription that guides each of the monitoring at each risk level. This is information that should be communicated to subgrantees, so along with the tools, so it's clear what will happen in terms of the monitoring. For example, a high-risk group might receive a site visit within the first 3 months, whereas a low-risk grantee may be scheduled for monitoring 9 to 12 months within the grant. So that those are the different pieces in terms of risk. And looking at risk, there's a lot of common red flags that you'll identify as you monitor your subgrantees. You may note some of these signal that you might want to address immediately. Some of the red flags include consistent late reporting, which may indicate inadequate staffing to support these activities or lack of training. Grantees not meeting their required match may signal trouble in their partnerships, or in terms of lack of organizational leadership or commitment to the SIF program. Continuous issues with National Service criminal history checks may signal problems with inadequate staffing or, again, lack of knowledge or training to support the activity. Subgrantees that do not implement required corrective action are also significant problems and common red flags. This could signal a larger organizational capacity or support issue. We've also found that consistent staff turnover can be reflective of difficulties within the organization, design of the program, or expectations of a specific position. If your subgrantee begins to demonstrate any of these signs above, what you want to do is check in with them to identify what the cause of the issues are, confirm that they're not having systemic problems. If they are, make sure that you clearly explain the expectations and provide training. If these occur, you also may want to shift the risk that you've identified to the program It's not a fixed item that you have to do only at the beginning of the year and should be reflective of, again, all the information that you know about the grantee. I'm going to pause for a second here and see if any questions have come through the chat.
And this is Eric just jumping in for a second. I went ahead and posted a link to that risk-based tool that you described, Chris. And just as a reminder, if you have a comment or a question, as Chris just said, please send it into the chat. Make sure you send it to all participants. We'll pause a couple moments here to see if we have any questions.
Great. Where I don't see any questions, I'm going to turn it over to Lynn, and she's going to talk about some of her experience. Lynn?
I'm sorry, I had to take my mute off. Thanks, Chris, I appreciate it. Just at the top, I want to share with you that one of the challenges, I think, in the work that we do in compliance monitoring is just getting organized. It's a lot. For us, we have our program staff is doing part of our monitoring. Our financial staff is doing monitoring. We have a learning team that's doing monitoring around our data collection for our evaluation plan, and then I'm handling criminal history checks. And I usually have responsibility for wading through the uniform guidance. If they need clarification on anything, that's usually my responsibility. So it's all over the organization. And just getting organized in terms of how we're going to handle this on an annual basis, it's tough. That's the purpose of our sub-grantee monitoring plan. It is embedded in our grant agreement. And I think the uniform guidance, when OMB overhauled the circulars in 2014, I think they really made it easier for us to put these plans together by clarifying our responsibilities as pass-through entities. So I just want to say that out front. It's a tough challenge in getting organized and, again, as Chris was mentioning, making certain that what we have in our plan aligns with our organizational policies and procedures. It takes a little bit of work, but if the plan is solid, it makes the job a little bit easier. So I want to share with you a tool that we use to both get organized and to report, to keep track of what we're doing, and we call it the REDF Compliance Snapshot. Next slide, please. Can you hear me? Next slide, thank you. Our snapshot it's actually a report that we give our subgrantees on an annual basis, and it captures their full record of compliance, and we wanted to do it in an at-a-glance, to give them an at-a-glance view. See if we can put it down to no more than 2 pages. And this covers everything that we're reviewing as part of our subgrantee monitoring plan. And we've been using this tool since late 2013, the early part of 2014, and it's worked very well for us. As you know, there's a lot of documentation that we have to review on an annual basis. Our subgrantees' audited financial statements, if they're at that $750,000 threshold, we're looking at their single audits, and we're downloading those reports. And for REDF, again, to comply with our routine grantee monitoring strategies, we're also looking at 990s and some other documents that may not be part of the STIF review, but are a part of REDF's review. So this one report organizes all of that. What you see here on this slide is a copy of the letter that we sent to grantees to inform them about the snapshot's purpose, and in the background there is a copy of the annual snapshot. If you can go on to the next slide, I'll walk you through what we include in this document. Is there a snapshot of the, is there a slide of the snapshot by itself? We can just skip this
Chris,
one.
if you want to click on one of the other tabs across, you got it?
There you go.
Great.
Thank you. So this is what our snapshot looks like. It's actually a legal size document. We keep track up at the upper right of the award itself, and that changes over time, how much we're awarding them initially. I usually include I don't include all of the key persons. We send this snapshot to the president and CEO or the executive director, and we also copy key persons, but we only name the one individual on the snapshot and their relationship manager here at REDF. Our initial risk assessment, we've revised this snapshot risk recently to make certain that it's compliant with the new pass-through entity requirements that are in the uniform guidance. So we start with that initial risk assessment, which we completed as part of our due diligence phase in onboarding this new group of subgrantees. They do extensive research on organizations at REDF, which is part of our normal process that we use up and beyond SIF. We also have another grant-making program, and they also do considerable due diligence on that. Not as extensively as they do for SIF, but we're already reviewing audited financial statements and collecting information on how long have key people been in position and things like that. And so as we're required to do under the uniform guidance, we were looking at that risk assessment to determine for us if they're going to have special conditions with the start of their award. And they've listed certain special conditions that we can pull from in the guidance. We can require that they have reimbursements rather than advance payments, that they submit more detailed financial reports. Again, the uniform guidance was very helpful to us in terms of guiding us on what do we do. If we're doing a risk assessment and this is a high-risk grantee, what do we do? Well, the purpose of the snapshot is to basically document that. And it is a tool that facilitates being very transparent with our subgrantees, because what we know or what we're recording in terms of their compliance, their record of compliance, it's all recorded here. There are no, it's like a performance evaluation. There shouldn't be any surprises. So what we're communicating with them throughout the lifespan of the award, all of it is included here. Again, items 2 through 9 on the snapshot, if you can just move down just a little bit, if you can move the PowerPoint down just slightly, you'll see that we have all of our audited financial statements there. We capture other information. We have to upload subgrantee award data as part of the Federal Funding Accountability and Transparency Act. We have to upload that data, so we will notify our subgrantees when we send the snapshots this year when we uploaded their data and what we uploaded. We also review the system for award management every year to make certain that we get an updated profile, to make certain that our subgrantees haven't been debarred or suspended. We also ask them to certify that. And all of the other basic information, like is there liability assurance, is it updated, the workman's comp. Have we done a desk audit or a site visit? If so, what are the outcomes of those monitoring activities? If there are any findings, we record them on the snapshot. And this isn't to say that we don't take immediate action to notify them about any corrective action that they have to take. Again, the snapshot is to sort of pull it all together so that at least annually we're giving them a record of their compliance, a report on their record of compliance. We also include criminal history check compliance. That's usually a big portion of this particular report, because we do require that our subgrantees go through the training. If we've required them to go through any additional training, it's all recorded here. If they have an alternative search procedure, all of that. We also track their quarterly financial reporting, and are they late? Are they submitting their reports on time? Because, again, our finance department may be handling one review. Our program staff may be handling something else. And when you pull all this together, you get a chance to see, it's like an aerial view of the subgrantee's compliance, so you can see, well, they're doing great with every area except for this. Or there's a problem consistently with reporting across everything, program reporting, criminal history checks, financial reporting, and that should really guide our actions in terms of how we're going to, what kind of requirements we're going to have for that subgrantee moving forward. So that's how we use this particular tool, and it's been very helpful to us. Our subgrantees like it. Another way it's been helpful to us is that this is what we submit to our auditors every year when they come in and they say, Lynn, you know, we're going to random sample these particular subgrantees in your compliance. I literally give them a digital file that includes a snapshot, and behind the snapshot, all of the documentation that's listed here is submitted to them as well. So our auditors are used to coming in. They literally will come in and say, let me have the snapshots for X, Y, and Z. And we just give them the entire digital file. It's a great way for us to keep everything organized and to communicate with our subgrantees how they're doing with this. And so that's our snapshot. And if you have any questions on it, I'll be happy to answer them for you.
So I'm not sure, just want to make sure everybody realizes that Rose had posted that we are going to send out a copy of the documents of that valuable snapshot. So before I continue, are there any specific questions for Lynn? Okay, I don't see anything right now. Know that we are going to pause again after Brittany's presentation, and again and we'll still have time at the end of the webinar. So thanks, Lynn. The Snapshot's a super comprehensive tool that provides clear documentation and transparency. It also seems like it saves you a ton of time at audit. So it seems effective and efficient. Thanks for sharing.
You're welcome.
So it looks like we do have a question. It looks like Stephanie asks, how are the snapshots shared with board members and other stakeholders?
We don't share our snapshots with the board. Our program staff, they have a similar document that sort of captures where the subgrantee is in terms of funding and other matters. But we haven't shared this with the board in the past, but we do advise our subgrantees, you know, when we send that letter regarding the snapshot, that we can share it with those key stakeholders, including the corporation staff if necessary. But so far, it's basically been a tool for dialogue between REDF and our subgrantees and our auditors.
And Lynn, we do have one more question. What is the average length of REDF's subgrants?
The new portfolio is 4 years, just right under, actually it's just a little bit over 4 years. We're starting them April 1st, and our grant ends July, 2019. 2020. So it's going to be right a little bit over 4 years for this next pool. In the past, the average length was about 5 years.
Great, thanks. So, Chris, I think those are the only questions we have for now.
Great. And again, if anybody has questions, we are going to pause a few more times before we are finished. So, in developing your monitoring plan, it's important to consider all compliance aspects, program as well as fiscal. So take a comprehensive look at all the information that you have in developing your monitoring plan. Supporting documentation that comes with fiscal reports, whether you do a spot check, as Lynn mentioned, kind of all the information that you receive, because you want to take that into account, because from an efficiency perspective, you might not want to look at the same information more than one time. There are efficiencies that will help you during the compliance projects. There are also many different approaches in terms of staffing and organizational capacity. Some site visits include both program and fiscal people. Some have one person doing both program and fiscal information, whereas during expertise or travel constraints, there might be just desk reviews or two components done separately. And yet some others even outsource parts of their monitoring, so that there's all kinds of ways in terms of developing your approach. When developing your monitoring plan, again, there's several items to consider. Definitely build off the risk-based approach. First, look at consider the frequency of your monitoring activities as you're looking at your policies. Ensure that you have adequate time to conduct the reviews based on location and distance of your subgrantees, as well as the significant budget to support your desired activities. Some of you can get in the car and within an hour or two be at the site, whereas others of you have to jump on a plane, so that there's big budgetary considerations to look at. Next, consider types of monitoring that you want to do that will be most successful, such as in-person monitoring, a desk audit, a virtual review, where subgrantees may submit requesting information and you review them and provide feedback. One thing, and I'll highlight what Lynn said, is if you're planning site visits, which most of you will at some point during this process, make sure that you plan ahead. Preparation is one of the key pieces. In terms of it's critical to be prepared prior to going on site, and a piece of preparation is to make sure that you're reviewing programmatic and fiscal reports that have already been submitted, the financial information, gathering information from everyone within your organization to make sure that you're fully aware of the entire picture of the subgrantee and their actions. Also, when creating your monitoring tool and during your actual monitoring activities, there's several different areas that you'll need to review. One of the important underlying principles is to look at systems and policies that your subgrantee has developed that will help you ensure compliance across the board, and not that you just looked at one sample document, and that's correct. Having a well-developed system will give you security that all of the similar documents are prepared in a similar manner. Yes, part of monitoring is looking at actual documents, and you want to make sure that you're also focusing on the forms. Again, the systems lead to efficiency and consistency. Look at the support the leadership at the subgrantee provides to the program. Look at ensure that management has allocated adequate staff with the appropriate experience to manage the SIF grant, and that overall the organization has capacity to ensure compliance of the SIF. Again, remember, you're ultimately responsible for their compliance. Other hot button issues to make sure that you're looking at is critical activities that are around compliance is around documentation retention, as well as national service criminal history checks. Financial management is definitely another content area to monitor. Again, focus on the systems and the policies more than looking at individual transactions, because with a well-developed written policy, you can rely on the information, again, being consistent. Reviewing policies and procedures for compliance is more easily completed off-site, where you'll have proper time to review the details. So again, that might be something that you might want to plan ahead in terms of preparation and asking for some information prior to the site visit, so you'll have adequate time to take a look at it. You also want to ensure the accounting system tracks the proper information. Some ideas might be to choose one monthly report, ask for the general ledger report that supports the details for that request. You may also want to ask for some of the supporting documentation that supports that, both for the cash and the match expended. Again, looking at what information is tracked by the accounting system will also provide you information on match, documentation, and budget tracking. So again, looking at an efficient system where things should fall in line. Another important fiscal piece is looking at internal controls, which encompass many aspects around policies, around separation of duties, ensuring that more than one person is involved in any one process. For instance, in terms of processing payments, collecting cash, or completing bank reconciliations, there should be at least 2 people involved, even if one is authorizing, and one is conducting the functions. Lastly, since payroll is typically a large budget item, you probably want to take a look at timesheets to ensure that there's proper time and activity documentation. Pay particular attention to staff that don't work on SIF full-time because that tracking needs to be more specific than those that are working on SIF exclusively. Again, focusing on things that are large items can help you with the efficiency. As I mentioned earlier, intermediaries are required to monitor subgrantees for compliance for both program and fiscal things. In terms of looking and monitoring progress on performance of a project, ensure that you're reviewing information from their evaluation as well as their process on raising the match. Some organizations separate their fiscal and program compliance monitoring, such as Share Our Strength, who you'll hear from in just a minute. This works due to many different staffing patterns. Again, at this point, I'm going to pause for a moment as I'm going to turn it over to Brittany, who's going to talk about her experience in monitoring. Brittany?
Hello, everyone. Again, my name is Brittany. Sorry, I had it on mute over here. Again, I'm Brittany Nixon, Share Our Strength SIF Financial Analyst and Compliance Manager. Share Our Strength actually currently has 6 subgrantees in our No Kid Hungry SIF cohort, and we've actually adopted a very hands-on approach for monitoring them. We essentially conduct remote mini audits on a monthly basis, and as part of our monthly reimbursement process, we conduct a deep dive analysis of subgrantee spending and compliance. In order to do so, subgrantees are required to submit several financial and NSCHC-related documents. You can click to the next slide, please. So on a monthly basis, subgrantees are required to submit the following: invoices for payment, a budget template with their year-to-date running spend, general ledger reports for both SIF and SIF match accounts, verification of matching funds, and that's also on a running up-to-date basis, timesheets for every employee charging time to the grant, as well as a summary report for wage calculations, receipts, proofs of payment, and any other documentation to verify specific purchase costs, as well as an NSCHC compliance tracking spreadsheet. Now, that one's not so much done on a monthly basis. We have, of course, lots of them coming in the beginning of the grant, but as the year progresses, of course, people aren't consistently being background checked depending on the type of program. To ensure consistency across reporting, we provide templates for as much as possible, including invoices, timesheets, the running budget, and NSCHC compliance. And on this slide, you can see our invoice is broken down into several categories, as well as this is just our general budget, but each budget report is tailored to each subgrantee. And so we can see exactly what's being spent, where it's being spent on a monthly basis, all in one view. And can easily compare it to previous spending from months prior. Next slide, please. We also have our own timesheet template that we share with them on kind of a quarterly basis. We update them, of course, per month. And they come built in with all kinds of formulas and everything to ensure that the wages are distributed properly, essentially, or effectively for, or especially for subgrantee staff that are not 100% dedicated to the SIF grant. In addition to our monthly financial review, our SIF finance and program staff meet weekly to discuss any financial and program updates. This gives us the opportunity to ensure that spending is not only compliant with federal guidance, but also in line with our specific NKH SIF programmatic goals. So it's a way for our program team to see, hey, yes, they are spending on these activities, and we can bounce ideas off of each other and just make sure their spending also makes sense. We additionally conduct yearly on-site audits for each subgrantee, and since I'm able to get a pretty accurate view of where the subgrantees are from a financial management standpoint on kind of a monthly basis, I really use these visits as a chance to learn more about the program's operations, how they're managing their grant on a day-to-day basis. I review all relevant written HR and accounting policies, conduct a spot check of NSCHC-related documents, and I have very open discussions with program and finance staff to just make sure the processes that we've set up are working for them. And it also gives us a chance to flag or to review any flagged financial management or compliance issues. Whenever possible, I really try to schedule these visits during a program-related event so I can see firsthand their progress towards programmatic goals and see if I can work up any ways to help them spend in a wiser way. So that's our monitoring process, and I guess I can kick it back to Chris.
So before I go on, does anybody have any specific questions for Brittany? Again, we're going to share the tools as part of the follow-up. Okay, again, let me remind everybody you can develop your questions because we will pause again shortly at the end of the webinar. Thanks, Brittany. The samples and templates are really helpful. Again, I'm sure having consistent information back to you is easy to monitor, as well as the open communication. Identifying any problems early is super helpful. So in terms of the site visit preparation prior to the visit will maximize your time and efficiency on site. So it's really helpful to send the tool ahead so the subgrantee can be familiar with the information that you're going to ask them. Also, be sure to let them know exactly who needs to be available in advance. There's nothing worse than someone having a planned day off and you really needed to speak to them. So make sure you do that ahead of time. Review the information that you have on hand. Again, looking at all aspects of your organization to check for timeliness, accuracy, any other internal information that you might receive from any other staff, to ensure that you're gathering the full input from the organization. Again, asking for policy documents to review prior to the site visit will make it more efficient for your time on site, as well as allow you the adequate time to properly and carefully review the information for all of the compliance components. So now that you've collected all the information, completed the site visit, you need to write up your findings and impressions of the monitoring activity to be able to provide constructive feedback on what you reviewed and provide clear instructions about the responses and required follow-up from your subgrantee. So when you're providing feedback, indicate what elements are non-compliant with the federal requirements and what needs changes and by when. So setting specific corrective actions and deadlines is really important to be clear in the memo, as well as adding continuous improvements, letting them know what systems are going well, asking them if there's information that you've identified that you might want to share with your portfolio. Identifying these promising practices might be really helpful for you to share with the entire group. So as you're monitoring your portfolio, note some themes where not just one subgrantee, but many of them might need additional training. This will also begin to develop a plan where your subgrantees are stronger. For those programs that might be in years 2 or 3, you might have a peer support where some subgrantees are really strong in one area and some are in another, and providing peer contact information to support each other can be helpful. So monitoring your subgrantees is an important part of the work we do, and want to take a second, and we just presented some ideas, 2 examples of organizations of what to consider when developing your monitoring strategy. I want to open up the phones again, open up the chat line to see if there are additional questions.
We do have a question for Brittany. There's a question of how do the subgrantees send their timesheets and financial reports? Do you use an online system or do you collect the reports through email?
Actually, through email. We've found that it's worked pretty well just having them send it in. There are sometimes there's some size limitation issues, so they have to break it up, but that's only for very large files. But for the past year, email has been working great.
Great. Thanks, Brittany. Do people have other questions for Lynn, Brittany, or Chris?
I also will do a shout out for the Knowledge Center. There's some additional tools in terms of, as you're looking at your monitoring plan, a few other grantees on the compliance call, in addition to Lynn and Brittany, had shared some tools so that there's some information contained there, as well as a resource of your program officers. They're always great.
And you can see that Eric has posted another link to the knowledge network of the compliance call we had in January that talked about subgrantee monitoring that has some good resources attached to it. Do we have any other questions? Chris, I am not seeing any questions, so I think that that may be it. We will send out, as I mentioned in the chat box, we will send out the slide deck and the resources that were touched upon here during this webinar, and we'll create a knowledge network link for those as well. And then next week, when the recording is ready, we will send out, we'll make the recording ready on the knowledge network as well, and just send everybody a link for that if there's other people in your staff or your subgrantees that you would like to listen to the webinar to be a starting point for the conversation with them on subgrantee monitoring. So one last chance if anybody has any questions, if you want to type those in. Otherwise, we will go ahead and end the call and give you the 10 minutes extra time. I am not seeing anything, so thank you everybody for joining us, and we will be sending out some emails with some additional resources, so thank you so much, and have a great day. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to email me, Rose Armour, and I'll get your questions to the right people and get you answers. Thank you so much.